just want to say one thing to Vinny in response to this conversation about fascism, Hitler, et cetera. I think liberals are largely right about the threat that Trump represents. I think they're largely right when they describe his ideology accurately as fascism. And I think it's important we also remember where that conversation
but the American
about
people don't agree with you.
Comments.
Krystal Ball was on Piers Morgan's show, Piers Morgan Uncensored, to go up against right-wing MAGA lunatic Vinny Oshana from the Patrick Bet-David show, another MAGA creep, Dan Crenshaw, and Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. And this was recorded right after the election happened. I wanted to go back and take a look at this and see the predictions that Krystal Ball made versus what Vinny Oshana was saying, because the media never does this. The media never holds MAGA and right-wingers accountable for the things that they say that are completely wrong and the predictions that they make that are completely wrong. So we're going to take a look at these clips from Piers Morgan Uncensored with Krystal Ball and Vinny Oshana and Cenk Uygur. I'm going to share my thoughts on this too. Let's get into it together.
Welcome to all of you. Krystal Ball, I had you on the show recently and you declared that Kamala Harris would win all 7 swing states. It would seem your crystal ball, if you don't mind me saying this, is a little cracked because Trump is currently won 4 of the 7 and leading in the other 3. Your response?
Yeah, no doubt about it. What I got wrong in this election is that I thought, even though I've been critiquing the Democratic Party, certainly since the Bernie Sanders movement, I thought that January 6th and the overturning of Roe versus Wade and Trump's manifestly authoritarian tendencies, as evidenced by the people who were closest with him in the White House, I thought it would be enough to overcome those problems on the Democratic side. And I was absolutely dead wrong. So couple of problems specifically with Kamala's campaign. I think there was way too much spending time with Liz Cheney, spending time with Mark Cuban, way too little time spending time with Bernie Sanders, spending time with Sean Fain, who's the president of the UAW. And in general, Piers, something I agreed with from your intro is the last guy who did the best with the coalition that is fleeing the Democratic Party right now is Bernie Sanders. And Democrats did everything they possibly could to block him from not only ascending to, be the Democratic nominee, but to block him from having any significant influence in the party. He offered a competing vision that could actually combat the fascism that you see with Donald Trump. Just talking about fascism, talking about how bad Donald Trump is clearly not enough to get the job done. And so we have the results that we have.
Yeah, Dan Crenshaw, I spoke to President Trump this morning, just rang him on his phone, and to my surprise, he picked up. And I think even he was a bit taken aback by the sheer scale of this victory. It's not now beyond the realms of fantasy that he could win the White House, the Republicans win the Senate, they win the House of Representatives, and he may end up winning the popular vote as well as Electoral College. An absolute clean sweep. And you can only conclude from that this is an utter repudiation of all the attack lines that his opponents have been trying on him for the past year. And I would include in that the weaponization of the legal system against Trump, the attempts to take his life from 2 assassination attempts and so on. You put it all together, and this is a gigantic 2 fingers from the American electorate to those who said Trump can't be president again.
And so, look, don't get me wrong, I kind of hope Democrats learn the wrong lessons here because I'd like to keep winning. But I'd be curious for her to unpack that a little bit more because it doesn't make sense to me. When Democrats were crushing it, really quick, when Democrats were crushing Republicans was in the 90s. That was in the 90s, and they were a very different party back then. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, well, the world was very different, and neoliberalism was absolutely ascendant there then. Now we're in a post-neoliberal world. And so what I'm not talking about a shift to the left. I'm talking about a shift top versus bottom. Trump has his version of fake populism. He's got his villains. He's got his scapegoats. Immigrants, cultural elites. Bernie Sanders, when he ran in the Occupy movement, when they were ascendant, talked about the 1%, talked about the millionaires and billionaires, talked about corporate greed, talked about unfettered capitalism. That's the shift that I'm talking about. And we know that it was effective because that Bernie to Trump pipeline, that was real. People who were voting for Bernie Sanders, who were Latinos, who were working class, who were Joe Rogan bros, who were Joe Rogan himself, have now, when faced with the choice between Trumpism and neoliberalism, chosen Trumpism. When faced with the choice between Trumpism and Bernie Sanders left populism, chose left populism every time.
Okay, let me bring in Cenk, because Cenk, I'm going to be honest with you.
I get that analysis a little bit better, yeah.
Yeah, Cenk, I woke up this morning and I actually thought of you. I felt sorry for you, because I thought, how on earth are you going to come on my show now, given the sheer scale of this devastating victory and devastating defeat for the Democrats? I mean, it is hard.
Here's the thing that always cracks me up about Piers Morgan is he loves to say that he's a liberal and he's not a right winger and all of this. But here he is saying to Cenk Uygur, he's rubbing it in that Donald Trump has won, and he's gleeful that Donald Trump has won because he's actually a Trumper.
Hard to imagine a worse morning to be Cenk Uygur. So how are you?
I'm great. I come on your show with the same swagger I always do.
But I would also say, Cenk, and I'm sorry to single you out, but you are the person here who's done a lot of this on my show. I do think the constant over-demonization of Trump, when people were calling him a fascist, a neo-Nazi, the new Hitler, all this, I kept warning people on the left, this is going to backfire. Most average Americans do not think Trump is the new Hitler. They did not see in his first term of office a fascist at work. Yes, they thought January 6th was awful. We all did. And it should never have happened. And that's more playing, to be honest with you, to Trump's refusal to ever accept losing. You know, I just watched the movie about him that came out, and it's crystal clear. This has always been in his DNA. Never accept defeat. And that was a consequence of that mindset. But he wasn't a fascist in his first term. Yes, he says stuff he shoots from the hip verbally all the time. And he says stuff which sometimes sounds awful. But he didn't actually behave like a fascist. And so when you tell the American people constantly, rather than telling us what Kamala Harris might do with the country, which she was completely incapable of articulating, by the way, and ducked the press, didn't do press conferences, blah, blah, blah. But when you constantly try and frame Trump, you know, I was at the Madison Square Garden rally, first one I'd been to. That was not a Nazi rally. It had a load of Jewish people sitting in the crowd. It had Israel banners all around the sides. It had a Holocaust survivor at the front. So when you try and frame it, as some on the left did, as a neo-Nazi rally and go back, as MSNBC did, to a rally in 1939 in Madison Square Garden that was a neo-Nazi rally, you are losing the plot. It is not the way to beat Trump. It is the way to fuel Trump and to get him to be more popular. Do you now think I was right?
So you have to draw an important distinction here. In fact, two distinctions. So first of all, not only did I never call him a neo-Nazi or Hitler, I called him fascist, and there is a giant difference. But last night, Representative Steve Cohen from Tennessee was on the Young Turks as we were doing election coverage, and he called him Hitler, and I said, don't do that. Because Hitler killed 13 million people. We're not anywhere near there. I mean, this morning, Joy Reid's talking about how Florida's a fascist state. What are you talking about? I'm going to go into Miami a little bit later in this week. It's ridiculous. But in terms of why I call him a fascist and why I think it's right, Piers, is because he tried to overturn the election in 2020, and he did fake elector plot. He planned a coup, etc. And that's what fascists do.
So we've got Vinny Oshana rolling his eyes here incessantly, and, you know, he's jonesing for whatever it is that he needs more of. But Cenk Uygur used the word fascism. Now, he did not think that there would be camps and that kind of thing, and there was a very public argument between Cenk Uygur and Francesca Fiorentini about that. But still, he was using the word fascism. Krystal Ball was using the word fascism. And of course, Piers Morgan is saying that is ridiculous. But we're going to see more of this here within these clips, and we're going to see how right Krystal Ball was and how wrong Piers Morgan and Vinny Oshana were and are.
I'm happy to say clean slate. Let's see what he does. But I think, unfortunately, I'm going to be proven right about him as well. Because, yes, he's a much better fake populist, and the Democrats still don't get it. They're bragging about how they raised $1 billion and how all the corporate CEOs are on their side and all the Cheneys are on their side. That is the worst strategy you could possibly imagine. It's not that Trump won this nearly as much as the Democrats lost this election. They don't get it. Stop bragging about how CEOs love you and how you raised $1 billion, and that is corruption defined. Now, when it comes to Trump, look, guys, let's all hope that I'm wrong, but my guess is you're all going to be deeply disappointed. He's going to rob the place blind. Elon's going to rob the place blind. They're not real populists. They're going to give corporate tax cuts. They're going to do all the things that Democrats do. They're just going to be more clever about it. Their number one priority is going to be giant corporate tax cuts and corporate deregulation. So if I'm right about it, you guys will see he was never a populist. He was only looking out for himself.
All right, Vinny, you must be absolutely thrilled today because everything you've hoped for. This is like Thanksgiving and Christmas just came a little early, right?
Piers, good morning. You know, Piers, it's always good when your guy wins. And I mean, you spoke with Donald Trump today. I know he's your friend, and it feels good. I know you're not supposed to say it, Piers, but we told you so. Okay, and you guys were talking about this, Hitler. Like, think about what the left did. You diminished the weight behind the name Hitler. Okay, so now this morning, everybody on the left is like, oh my God, Hitler won, and the Nazis are celebrating. All right, but Piers, people like Cenk and all these left, MSNBC, all the hags from freaking The View, they should be calling Trump and thanking him and celebrating. So at least they're gonna have something to talk about for the next 4 years. Okay, because these people have no substance. It's just Trump is the bad man. Watch us, listen to us. And I think it's a great day for America, Piers. And I just, he said last night, and I wrote this down, that God spared his life for a reason, and that's to save the country. I'm ecstatic, Piers. I'm besides myself. It's amazing.
I mean, Krystal, talking to Kamala Harris, I do think it's pretty extraordinary she hasn't conceded yet. I mean, to be fair to Hillary Clinton, she did concede, in the early hours. In 2016, Kamala Harris has had one of the biggest drubbings in modern political history anywhere and still hasn't conceded. We're told she may make an address conceding at 6 o'clock tonight, Eastern time, which seems to me way too late. Why is she not? I mean, given all the fury from Democrats about Trump never conceding the election last time, surely the right thing to do would be for her to concede immediately, wouldn't it?
I mean, sure. We know she's going to concede. No one is seriously considering she's going to, as vice president, not do the electoral certification, et cetera. So I have no doubt she's going to concede. Democrats are going to say it was free and fair, and they're all going to move forward. I just want to say one thing to Vinny in response to this conversation about fascism, Hitler, et cetera. I think liberals are largely right about the threat that Trump represents. I think they're largely right when they describe his ideology accurately as fascism. And I think it's important we also remember where that conversation
but the American
about
people don't agree with you.
Comments.
Yeah, Krystal, the problem is,
hold on, let me just say.
I would really urge, I would really urge liberals. Look, I am a liberal, all right? I know Cenk never believes me, but I am, all right? I know Trump personally. I've known him a long time, but I'm not a natural conservative, never have been. When I go on the 5 on Fox, they put me in the liberal chair. I joked with Harold about it the other day. They put me in his seat, right? So there's a reason they do that. I used to run a newspaper in Britain, which was lent to the left. So I really am. I'm more of a Bill Maher kind of guy when it comes to my politics. But I honestly urge liberals, wake the hell up. If you keep calling him a fascist,
I'm not arguing
if you keep calling him a fascist when he's won the popular vote, you're basically calling the majority of... Hang on. Hang on, let me finish. Let me finish my point.
How are you supposed to describe?
Hang on.
So Piers Morgan is chastising Krystal Ball for saying that liberals are probably right that Donald Trump is a fascist. And what are we seeing now? We're seeing people who are being deported to a dungeon, essentially, in El Salvador. The Trump administration admitting that they were wrong and saying, we don't care. We're going to defy the Supreme Court. Is that anything other than fascism? We have Donald Trump talking to the president of El Salvador and saying, maybe we'll start sending citizens there, U.S. citizens there. Is that not fascism? That's going to go against the Supreme Court, I'm sure. So Krystal Ball was exactly correct, and Piers Morgan was wrong. Vinny Oshana was wrong about this idea of Donald Trump being a fascist. It's been now 5 months since this debate was originally recorded. Do you think that Piers Morgan will have Krystal Ball and Vinny Oshana back on the show, and Piers will say, you know what, Vinny, you and I were wrong. Krystal Ball was right. I doubt that's going to happen. The media never does that.
Authoritarian right-wing ideology.
Let me finish my point. Let me finish my point, which is this.
You guys cut me off, and then I don't get to finish.
If he wins the popular vote, as well as everything else, what you're doing when you continue to call him a fascist, you're basically saying that all these Americans who voted for him are supporting a fascist and are therefore themselves fascists.
Okay.
Do you not get that?
But let's make a distinction here. I'm talking about accurately describing reality, a reality that was described by not liberals, by his chief of staff, John Kelly, a lifelong Republican, by Mike Mattis, right? By, ask Mike Pence how he feels about Donald Trump and his authoritarian tendencies in office. That's different. Accurately describing reality, which I think we all have an obligation to do, is different from arguing about how I think they should most effectively go about defeating that fascist ideology as embodied by Donald Trump. And on that, I agree with you. I think they go about it all the wrong ways by not offering an alternative vision that accurately identifies the problems in American society as unfettered capitalism, corporate greed, etc. So, in terms of the electoral piece, I think you're correct. But, just looking at the definition of fascism, looking at the people who served with him, who know him way better than I do, who say, yeah, I think that he fits the definition. I can't lie and not accurately describe reality because that would be dishonest to my audience.
So again, I would argue that Krystal Ball was exactly correct 5 months ago in predicting the fascism of Donald Trump. Nobody knew exactly how this would play out. I don't think anybody was necessarily saying Donald Trump is going to send immigrants who haven't committed any crimes, haven't been convicted of any crimes, haven't had charges against them, that Donald Trump was going to send those people to El Salvador. I don't think anybody predicted that. But Krystal Ball was exactly right. Cenk Uygur was right. He didn't go far enough, but he did say that Donald Trump is a fascist. And Piers Morgan and Vinny Oshana were completely wrong. But like I said, I don't think there will be any apology or any acknowledging that they were incorrect. And what more are we going to see to solidify Krystal Ball's prediction of Donald Trump's fascism? Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you agree with Krystal Ball about this, and to a lesser degree Cenk Uygur? Or do you think that Piers Morgan and Vinny Oshana are correct that Donald Trump is not a fascist and is not implementing fascist policies? Let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. This is Chris on Culture, and I'll see you in the next video.